I think there we go. And it has started.
Okay, so Jim, would you like to tell us what we're supposed to be looking for and what the yellow and the green signify?
Sure, or if Latifa wants to do that.
Oh, okay.
I don't know, Latifa, do you want?
I prefer not to talk as much.
Oh, okay, yeah. Latifa hasn't been feeling very well lately, so okay, I'm totally happy to do it. Okay, so this is the chart that hopefully all of you are familiar with because the grants committee spent a lot of time looking at this back in, was it April? Yeah, April, getting ready to make the recommendation for the full commission meeting back in May. And so the columns off to the left, A through H, that's some kind of background information, the name of the program, the region, how much they accepted last year, and then what they requested this year. And the F, G, and H are this year's funding request, the number of member service years, and then their cost per member service year. Those are the things that are in those columns. The columns on the right, double A through AD, those are changes from what the committee recommended to the full commission in May and what the full commission approved. And Latifa, do you mind scrolling back to the left a little bit to show those columns that were approved back in May? Or maybe you have those columns hidden. Yeah, so that, and we're not going to go through all that stuff today. But the oops, we lost your screen. You're muted, Latifa.
Okay. Are you all seeing the approved by commission on 5/1/24?
I'm not seeing anything
anymore
from your screen.
I think you stopped sharing your screen. And so, yeah, it's just back to the people.
Weird. I touched no buttons, no Teams.
Well, I can pull it up, Latifa, if you want. I mean,
No
I've got
worries.
a copy of it open.
Here we go.
Teams is alive and doing its own thing, essentially.
Yeah.
Alive and well.
Teams is constantly a struggle, for sure.
I hope you can see it.
Well, the area for, oh yeah, there it is. Okay. Okay. So the stuff that's there kind of in the salmon color heading, and that's the stuff that was approved at the May meeting. Again, we're not going to dive into that today unless people want to. So Latifa, if you can scroll back to have those columns starting with AA.
The struggle is so real.
So close. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a long way to get back around to answering Eileen's question. So the cells that are in green are increases from what was previously approved. And Latifa, I tell you what, if you click the X in that tan box up at the top right, that'll close that. And then if you click that little caret that was right above that. No, the one up, yeah, that one. Okay, that'll give us a little bit more screen. The green boxes are things that went up from what was approved in May, and the yellow boxes are things that went down from what was approved in May. So you can see there, and what Latifa has on the screen right now are all of the continuation programs. So those are the ones that are going either into year 2 or year 3. And you can see there's several yellow and several green. Some programs for various reasons accepted less than what was offered. And so those are reflected in the yellow boxes. And then because we had several programs that accepted less than what was offered, and because we had we still had some American Rescue Plan dollars that were essentially unspent, and then we had some unexpended funds from the previous year that were unspent. We had a couple programs that asked for, increases, and those are the ones that, like Eileen's coming back in,
Yeah.
maybe via computer.
Yep.
Great.
Yeah, that is much better.
Yeah.
Great.
All righty.
So yeah, so the ones that are green are increases from May, and you can see there were a couple programs that requested less money, but increased their cost per MSY up to the maximum, and 25,000 was the maximum. And you can see in column H what their original cost per member service year was. So they went up a little bit, but overall, their total cost or their total request went down. And for several of the ones that asked for more money, their cost per MSY went down from what they previously had requested. Although I see, so the total amount went up, but the cost per MSY went down a little bit. And then there's more below in the new and recompeting. But before we go to that, does anybody have any questions about the continuation request?
How does the cost per MSY go down? Does the program make that decision so that they can put money towards other things, or?
Yeah, well, typically what happens when a cost per MSY goes down is that they are, so in those two examples for University of the South and Porter Leith, they requested more members, and the cost per MSY for Porter Leith was only $28 above the maximum, and so we asked them to adjust that down. So their cost per MSY didn't really change that much. But for University of the South, they asked for a small increase in funding, but more MSYs than what we originally had. And so when you divide the total funding by the MSYs, because they asked for a little increase in money, but a larger increase in MSYs, the cost per MSY overall went down from what was approved in May. Now you can see their original request there in columns F, G, and H is essentially what they've requested as supplemental funding from what was approved back in May.
Okay, I understand now.
Yeah.
Although,
Thank you.
with that, then, were you saying before that from additional funding, so like the first one I'm seeing, like Teach for America, Memphis, where it says funding requested 85,000, but then the funding accepted 90,000. Is that the extra funding, or how does that work?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Column E, that's what they accepted last year.
Oh.
And that's just for comparison purposes, just so, when we're looking at how much a program had last year compared to what they've asked for this year, are they asking for more money or less money? And so, yeah, that's just that's last year. So what they asked for the current year is in column F. So that one specifically, Teach for America asked for 85,000 for this year, and 85,000 is what the grants committee recommended and what the full commission approved, and that's what they accepted. So that's why theirs is not highlighted at all, because the ones that aren't highlighted at all didn't ask for any kind of change compared to what was requested or what was approved at the May meeting.
Got it. Yeah, and I just saw the year difference, so never mind on that one.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That's a good question. There's a lot of information in this chart, so it's always better to ask.
I actually have one more question.
Sure.
So when the cost per MSY went down, like for University of the South and Porter Leith. Does that reduce the members' living allowance?
No,
Okay,
no,
good.
it just is the calculation. It's a simple division. If you divide column AA by the number in column AA by the number in column AB, you get the number in AC. So it's just the amount that the program gets per member. But yeah, no, the living allowance is a separate issue, and so the programs have to pay the minimum for full-time members.
Mhm.
There are no minimums for less than full-time members, so they can. There's generally a range that they do for less than full-time members, but for full-time members, they have to pay the minimum.
Okay. Okay, good. Thanks.
So if there are any more questions about that, Latifa, if you could scroll down just a little bit. Oop, we lost the sheet again.
That was on purpose this time.
Oh, okay. Okay, good.
But
Well, while Latifa is pulling that back up,
Yeah.
what I was going to talk about next was so that's the continuation request. I was going to talk about the amount of money available.
Mhm.
So and so we, just as a refresher, each year we get a formula allocation, and that amount fluctuates a little bit from year to year, usually not by a whole lot, but maybe tens or maybe $100,000 or so from year to year. Then we separately have American Rescue Plan money that was awarded 3 years ago, and we've spent and allocated a bunch of that money already, but there's still some left. And then we have money that programs were awarded for last year but haven't spent completely, and that is what's called carryover. And you can see in column AA, those boxes there, the 3772464. That's the formula allocation for this year, and so that didn't change. We increased. And sorry, the number in column F is the same as the number in column AA, because column F is where the numbers are stored, and the cells in column AA just point to that. So you can't see the difference, but what was in this spreadsheet back in May was a little bit less in that carryover line, and so we just increased that to use up a little bit more of the carryover. And because we had those programs that were in yellow, asked for a little bit less funding, and we can only use the American Rescue Plan money for specific purposes. We reduced the amount of American Rescue Plan money that's in this chart, but it's still, it covers all of the expenses. So all of the requests that are above are completely covered by the allocation plus the carryover plus the American Rescue Plan funding. So Latifa, you want to scroll up just a little bit to show the new recompeting and then the planning grant section? Okay, yeah. It's a little bit too far up. So if we can go down a little bit further. There you go. Good. Oh, that's a little bit too far. Oh, actually, Artist Year is the first one, right? Oh, hands on. Okay. So again, the same as up above with the continuations, the new and recompeting. And so these are programs that have already gone through the 3-year process and had to recompete. plus the ones in red on the far left are brand new applicants. So here again, we had a few programs request less either in funding and or member service years. And so that's reflected in the yellow boxes. We had two programs that asked for a little bit more money. And you can see Bridges really is it's like $80 more than what was approved. And the United Way of West Tennessee planning grant is $120 more than what was approved in May. So those are the changes reflected in those boxes.
I have a quick question with Hands on Nashville. Since they are now a part of United Way of, how do you say that? United Way. Yes.
Yeah.
Would they still get separate funding, or would that just, because it's United Way of Greater Nashville words. Anyways, how does that change anything for their funding since they are no longer a separate entity?
It does. Instead of the money now being granted to Hands on Nashville, it's granted to the United Way of Middle Tennessee. And Hands on Nashville is now a program of the United Way of Middle Tennessee. So the contract that we have is with the United Way of Middle Tennessee. It's no longer with Hands on Nashville because, as you mentioned, it doesn't exist as a separate entity anymore.
Got it.
Yeah. So and what we're trying to do, we didn't do it on this one because we haven't captured it everywhere, but we're trying to where hands-on is appears somewhere that we put United Way of Middle Tennessee in parentheses or something like that, just as a note that it's no longer a freestanding agency.
Got it. I just remember hearing about that and it made me wonder because I know legally they've dissolved, but everybody else is now on that branch of United Way. So
yeah. So Eileen, that's the rundown of the stuff that what the programs asked for compared to what was offered. Again, just the summary is several programs requested less and a couple programs requested more. And staff recommends funding them at, obviously the ones that requested less, we fund them at that level because they don't need what originally was offered. And for the ones that requested more, we recommend funding those as well because there's money to do it. And especially with the fact that the American Rescue Plan funds, if we don't use those, if we don't allocate those by September, then we will lose the opportunity to allocate any more of those funds. Sorry, Eileen, you're muted.
I'm sorry, is there an end date for the disbursement of those funds? Of the American Rescue Plan funds?
No, I mean, they go into a federal award that does have an end date, but those end dates we can extend long enough for the programs to be able to spend all that money.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So there shouldn't be any as long as we allocate the money, the funds that are in this chart, as long as we do get that done before September, the programs will have access to that money during the entire length of the 24-25 program year.
Okay. And is that all the rest of the money from the American Rescue Plan, or is there more still sitting there?
Yeah, unfortunately there's I think about $130,000 or maybe $150,000 that's going to be left on the table. But as I mentioned, there are specific buckets. So one of them is for additional members. So it has to be like Artist Year is a completely brand new program. So all of their members are brand new members. They're 100% funded through ARPA dollars. But the programs that were around last year, if they requested fewer members, obviously we can't use ARPA money for fewer members, but if they ask for more than what they had last year, we can use ARPA money for that.
Mm.
Then there's another bucket if they are paying above the minimum living allowance.
Mhm.
And not every program is doing that. So, you know, we pretty much have maxed out how we can allocate the remaining ARPA dollars with this group
Mhm.
of applicants. And yeah, so that 130, 40, 50,000 is just going to have to be left on the table, unfortunately.
Okay. Oh, well.
Yeah.
Okay, so does anybody else have any questions? Okay, so I guess we should take a vote. And so I guess somebody needs to make the motion. I can make the motion. I move that we approve the changes to the formula funding allocations based on what Jim just explained to us.
This is
Somebody
Adam,
second?
second.
Okay. All righty. So I think we can do this.
Wait, just out of curiosity, because there was a lot of back and forth. What were the changes that we were talking about? I thought we
Yeah,
were
so
going through
yeah.
programs.
No, that's a good question. Anything in columns AA through AD that's in yellow or green is a change from the previous. So you would be approving those that are in yellow or green.
Got it.
In summer, the greens are increases and the yellows are decreases.
Got it. That's what you meant by changes. I was like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
where are we at with this?
Okay. So let's see. There's only looks like there's 6 of us here. So
Yeah, well, I think there's only 3 committee members. The other 3 are staff.
okay. So it's me, Patricia, and
Adam.
Yeah. So okay, Patricia,
Oh, yeah.
aye or nay?
Yeah, like, I need to know what we're doing. This needs to be in person. This is terrible. Yay, I guess.
Okay. Yay for me and Adam.
Yay, approved.
Okay. It's approved. So we will present this at the full board meeting next week. And then the board can vote on it.
I'll go to the next document. Eileen,
Okay.
just let me know where to go. But for Patricia, the change is just looking at column F and then the changes in column AA with the yellow and green, if you want to go look back at it in the documents Jim sent over.
Got it. No, it was more because there was the back and forth of clarifying things. I got lost in the process of what we were actually voting on. And so that's where it was like, wait a minute. I want to make sure I know what I'm saying yes to before I just go and say yes.
Sure thing. Eileen, where should we go next?
What, I don't know what other documents there are, so I guess whichever one makes makes sense.
Does the timeline make sense, or is KIF next?
Okay.
Yeah, it might make sense to just stay with the AmeriCorps stuff.
Yeah.
And go look at the timeline
Okay.
before moving on to the operational budget.
Okay. Okay. Timeline.
That's good. All right. So, I guess as this document says it, so what Jim sent you all, it states like which programs are going to be competitive new, and then, repeat competitives, and then formula new, and formula recompete. I don't know if it makes sense for us to have this on the screen right now or to go down to like the timeline.
I guess the
Just
timeline.
Okay.
Has something changed in the timeline?
This is a new timeline.
It's a new timeline. Okay.
This is for program year 25-26 funding.
Oh, okie doke. Gotcha. Okay, so it starts with our commission meeting next week.
And just as a caveat, these dates are all tentative, except for the meeting that's happening next week.
Mhm.
Because that date of August the 6th of receiving the embargoed notice of funding opportunity from the AmeriCorps agency is just anticipated. If we get it on a date that's significantly different than that, that will impact the rest of the timeline.
Okay.
But based on when they sent it to us last year, this is our best guess. So just know that we'll almost certainly have to come back to the full commission in October once we actually have that notice of funding opportunity in hand with a revision of this timeline to reflect the actual dates.
Okay. So the whole timeline is basically an automatic calculation based on the start date. Pretty much.
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, there are, so we generally anticipate that they make the announcement for the competitive process in April, and we generally have a commission meeting in early May to review that, make the formula decision. But again, all those dates are kind of built around the initial date of when they release the notice of funding opportunity. And Latifa, I don't know if it's
Okay.
the same for everybody else, but right now I'm only seeing about half of that document. Yeah,
There you go. That's better.
So right now we're just going over the timeline, correct?
Yeah, I think, I think we can just like scroll down and through it so slowly, and if anybody has a question, we can stop and try and answer it.
Yeah, no, it was more of I just so I could know what we're actually doing at each thing, because sometimes there's not specific transitions of saying we're doing this now or we're that's all.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, and just as a little bit of additional background, the timeline obviously sets out the dates of when we expect to do various things and when the commission is going to meet to approve things, et cetera. But that section up at the top also indicates what programs the full commission intends to submit to the competitive process. And again, there's a national competitive where we can send programs to compete against other applicants from across the country. The AmeriCorps agency makes the decision on who gets funded out of that. If we get programs into that, it frees up more formula money that the commission can use to fund other programs. And so that's outlined at the very top in those first couple paragraphs. Some of it is stuff that that we don't have any control over, like there are several competitive programs that are at the end of their 3-year process, and they have to recompete in order to stay in the competitive process. There are some continuation programs that are, going into their 2nd or 3rd year, and so we generally leave those folks in continuation status. But the decision of which programs get sent to that competitive process that are currently in the formula portfolio is up to the commission. And we can, once we kind of finish with the timeline, we can go back and look at that a little more closely if folks want.
Okay.
I can continue to scroll, or does it make sense to give everyone a couple minutes to just look at it via the attachment Jim sent? But I can continue to scroll too.
And I'll also say that these dates are very, very similar to the process that we just are wrapping up, actually wrapping up with this, the thing that you all just did to revise the funding for the year that's about to come up. So there's nothing out of the ordinary from the previous year. We just changed dates, to make sure that things weren't on the weekend, that kind of thing, and to reflect the actual date of the July meeting and the October meeting for the full commission. So it's pretty similar to what was in last year's timeline. And if we get the notice of funding opportunity around the same date as we did last year, there shouldn't be that many significant changes needed in October.
Does anybody have any questions or want to have discussion around anything? Generally, in past years, we've approved the timeline and then dealt with changes in schedule as they are presented to us.
Yeah, and Lateefa, it might make sense to scroll back up just a little bit up to the competitive part. So that couple paragraphs there, Public Education Foundation is in their third year, so they have to recompete if we want them to stay in the competitive program portfolio. That list that starts with Appalachia Regional Coalition on Homelessness. Those are all programs that are currently in the formula portfolio, but they are in their third year and they have to recompete. So the staff recommendation is that all of those programs we send up to the competitive process. If any of those programs and or Public Education Foundation don't get funded, the staff recommendation is that we then just put them into the formula portfolio as recompeting programs. And then you can see there underneath that bolded sentence, City Year, Martha O'Brien Center, and Tennessee's Community Assistance Corporation are continuation competitive programs. So there's not really anything that we need to do about them other than to submit their applications when it's time to submit.
Do we review the applications of the programs that are being submitted to the competitive process?
We do a staff review. We don't, because the AmeriCorps agency does its own grant review process. We don't have grant reviewers review them because, again, AmeriCorps makes that decision, and we could have grant reviewers score them, but those scores wouldn't impact whether or not they get funded. So we do an intensive staff review process, including two rounds of feedback. So they submit a draft, we give them feedback, they submit another draft, we do additional feedback, and then they submit the final draft before we then submit those applications to the AmeriCorps agency.
Okay. And if they're not approved for the competitive funding, we get that information back in time to put those applications into the pool for our local grant reviews.
Correct. Yeah. So that's the notification that we get in April. But prior to that, what we do is those programs are just a little bit above what's on the screen right now. The Public Education Foundation, and then that paragraph that started with the Appalachia Coalition on Homelessness. All of those applications we'll send to the formula review team along with any brand new applicants. And the review team for the formula process will review all of them. Any program that doesn't get funded in April, we've already had the review team look at them and we have scores. And so we can then present those scores to the grants committee.
Okay.
for the grants committee to make the recommendation for the full commission.
Okay, thank you.
Time check. I
Okay.
believe there are 2 other documents to review.
Okay, do we
It's
need to take
9
a vote?
minutes left.
Do we need to take a vote on this or? um,
I think you certainly can. The real question is whether or not the grants committee wants to recommend this to the full commission, or if you have any changes that you'd like us to make.
Yeah.
This one is a pretty straightforward document, so
Yeah.
I think it's up to you, Eileen.
Okay, well, do anybody have any objections to us putting this in front of the full commission next week? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, let's move on. We have just about less than 10 minutes left.
Did you want to look at the KIF budget first or the commission support grant?
I don't know, which one should we do first, Jim, in case we don't get to the second one?
Well, I don't think it matters too much. I mean, they're
Okay.
both operational grants, and I mean, and the full commit, you can handle it however you want if we don't have time to get to both of them. But I think we can get through both of them pretty quickly.
Okay.
So I would start with the commission support grant. And while Latifah is working on bringing that up, I'll just say that it looks very intimidating because there's a lot of green and some yellow on both of these. And these are our operational grants. So this is the federal funding that we use to pay for staff salaries and for travel and rent and all that kind of stuff. And the bottom line is that we submit the original application typically in November of each year, but the AmeriCorps agency doesn't know exactly how much funding is available at that point, so they tell us to use the 2023 level of funding and not to use any unexpended funds from 2023 in the 2024 budget. And so, Latifah, if you'll actually scroll down to the bottom that has the chart of the funds available. Once Congress makes appropriations, they know how much money we have, and then they tell us that we can incorporate any unexpended funds into the budget. And that, down a little bit further, if you'll just stay right there. So then we take the actual allocation amount and then any unexpended funds, and that essentially gives us more money that we can use. And you can see the actual allocation compared to last year went down by $92. So not a huge change. But then we added in that green box, the 66,000. That's our unexpended from the previous year. And then the FY25 funding for our state appropriations went up a little bit from what we had originally anticipated. So that's reflected in that number there. And then the yellow numbers kind of at the bottom, we took out match so that we weren't overmatching. We only have to do dollar for dollar, and you can see the numbers at the very bottom. 469, 603 is the total federal, and we're already overmatching a little bit by providing 470, 402. So we're a little bit more than a dollar for dollar. So we took out any other match money so that we're not committing to overmatch, because they will hold us to whatever we propose as a percentage, not an actual dollar amount. But so if we're proposing to provide a 55% match, that's what they're going to hold us to. So in general, it's better to do a 50-50 match, and then if we overmatch, it's okay, but it doesn't penalize us if we can't overmatch. So that's the source of funding at the very bottom. And Latif, if you'll scroll back up to the top, just really quickly, the staff amounts were increased to reflect an increased pay for performance amount. And you can see the total change from the previous amount wasn't significant, about $4,000. The benefits, most of those reflect increases because of the increase in pay for performance. But we did have a couple that went down a little bit. One, because we had a staff vacancy for about half the year, and then the other because we have to reflect the actual participation in the 401k match program. Travel, we updated amounts and then added some additional travel. We moved the staff travel from the Commission Investment Fund into this grant, and we'll talk more about that later. So the travel went up significantly compared to the previous. And again, part of that's because we had more money to use. We had roughly an additional $66,000 to allocate. So Latif, if you'll scroll down to the next section. Supplies, we added a line for supplies that wasn't in the previous version. Then in section I, you can see we added a couple line items that weren't in the previous budget: postage, Governor's Volunteer Stars Awards, corporate social purpose meeting. And then we made some adjustments to the other lines based on actual cost. So most of them went up, one or two went down a little bit. And those are the changes for this budget. And you can see that again, the bottom line number, sorry, I should have said to begin with, there's the federal column. That's the total amount is, let's see if you can go back to that zoom in level that you were before, because that's, yeah, okay, that's better. The federal column is that first column that has green and yellow numbers in it. The match column is the second, and then the third column that has green and yellow in it is the total of the two. And you can see the total budget went from $879,439 to $940,005. So, and again, that's that incorporation of that $66,000 in previous year unexpended funds that we can now use in this budget.
Okay, anybody have any questions, concerns? Anybody have any objection to us presenting this at the full commission meeting next week? Okay. Guess we can, yeah.
Yeah, and while Latifah's pulling up the KIF budget, it's got a lot more line items in it, so it looks a lot more complicated. But the bottom line is kind of the same in terms of Latifah, if you'll scroll all the way to the bottom to the source of funds. Thanks, Adam. So the numbers at the bottom, our actual allocation went down a little bit, not much, by about what's that? About $40 or so. The carryover amount that we're allowed to use, the $77,693. And then the other thing we did with this budget is we moved some of the commission support grant expenses from this budget to the other. And just as a refresher, the two budgets cover an 18-month period. So they go from January of 2024 through June of 2025. But they're only providing funding for 12 months in the commission support grant budget. And then they've given us half of that money in the commission investment fund budget, the one that's up on the screen now, to pay for those expenses that would typically be paid in the commission support grant budget. And that's very confusing. I apologize, but that's how they decided to extend these grants for an 18-month period. And their plan is to, after that, then annually they'll be on a July to June timeframe instead of a January to December timeframe. So Latifah, if you can scroll back up to the top, most of this is adding line items where we didn't have before because we had the unexpended funds amount to use. And so you can see there's a bunch of line items that were added and then some that were increased. There were a couple that we reduced based on actual rates, and the ones that are in the second and third column that are yellow, those are amounts that we moved from this budget into the budget that you just approved or just looked at and approved. So Latifah, yeah, if you'll scroll down to the next, added some supplies and increased some amounts, added a few line items under the contractual and consultant services. And then the other support cost section, increased, some of them went down based on actual expenses. And then again, those that are in the second and third column that are yellow, most of those we moved over to the other budget that you just approved. We did leave a few expenses in this budget, but most of them went over to the other one.
Okay, that's confusing.
It is. It's very confusing. Yes, it's very confusing. It's gonna be very confusing probably next week to try and explain this because it's just very confusing. But if you or Patricia have questions about that budget, I'm happy to. I know we're at time, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Looks like Eileen
think
maybe
Eileen is-
froze.
Mhm. I was going to ask Jim, is it possible, because, and maybe Patricia, you might be about to say this. Go ahead, Patricia.
Oh, I was just gonna ask, what I noticed on there, although you kind of explained some stuff, because I'm guessing it was either from the other budget or whatever. When you have the two columns, and this is as much as my financial knowledge goes for all this, when you have the two columns that are like, whatever they were, the D and F, and you have the total, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, you're supposed to have, like, if you're adding up, so you have this number you start with, then there was showing like the federal thing of federal share and whatever. You didn't have anything in there. And so it was just this number, and the total was the same. But the thing was that there was the note on the side that said this number has increased or decreased. Like there was more staff or less staff, whatever it was. But yet that wasn't actually reflected. Like there was no dollar difference. Does that make sense? You may have to go down the thing.
Yeah, well, the difference would have been from that version, that previous version of the budget, not the one that you're looking at.
Right.
So if you were to put those two budgets side by side, the one that was approved in May and this one, you would see that those numbers went up or down. The ones that are in green went up, the ones that were in yellow went down compared to what was in the May version.
Yeah, I figured as much. It's just like you're saying, like when you're looking at the budget itself, you don't see that. So unless you're comparing the two, I figured as much. That was the only thing that came to mind, that it was like, does like something seems like it's missing, but I don't think it actually is.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Again, it's increases or decreases compared to the previous version of that same budget. But I mean, I guess we could potentially put all of that in one document, but that would probably be even more confusing than what we have.
Well, I mean, it's the state. Why not add to the confusion? Isn't that what they are? It's just a bunch of confusion? I'm kidding.
Well, it's yeah. The state, unfortunately, is a little bit easier to deal with. It's the federal. This is a federal grant, and so it's a little bit more complicated than it has been in the past. And hopefully after they get through this one period of doing an 18-month grant, it'll go back to being an easier budget to look at and approve.
Got it. So then I should have said it's the government. The very definition is of the government is confusion. So never mind. I just said that.
Okay, guys. Well, we're over time. Latifa asked if we should do our, like approval to move ahead to the commission over email before next week's meeting, if anybody needs more time to look this over. I'm okay with approving and moving forward to the commission.
Was there anything else, Latifa, you were going to say? Because you had said you were going to, I thought you were going to bring something up and then.
No, I know both you and Eileen said it was confusing. And so I didn't know if you wanted more time to review before you greenlighted it, but
No, I think what
Oh, well.
what I meant was it's a confusing process to have to make that transition. And when you're moving things over from one way, one budget to another budget, it's so easy to forget something, leave something in the other place. And that's what I meant, not that, we needed to study it more. So, so anybody, I guess it's only you and me, Patricia, do you have any objection with us moving forward to present this to the full commission next week? I'm sure they'll have questions too.
Now, as long as I don't have to answer the questions, I'm all good.
Yeah. Well, and
Okay.
hopefully we'll have a little bit more time to look at those two budgets next week. And if people have questions, we can answer any questions that people
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
So is there not a way to put like in one of the columns, like kind of how the one budget had the year that I was not realizing it was the
Yeah.
2023, 24. Can you not put those 2 years next to each other? I guess that wouldn't make sense in budget. This is why I don't do the financial aspect for
Yeah.
profit stuff.
Yeah.
Or I shouldn't be.
Well, yeah, I mean, we could do that side by side comparison, but it might actually be more confusing. But we'll take a look at it to see how confusing that is if it's all on the same page all at once.
Okay. Yeah. If it starts to get confusing, then just ignore everything that I'm saying and just leave it alone.
Okay. So I guess we'll have to do our planning at the meeting next week also. Yeah, I guess that's it. We're a little bit over time. Are we good to adjourn? Okay.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Take
everyone.
care. See you next
Nice
week.
meeting you guys. Take
Nice
care.
Bye-bye.
meeting you. See you next
Likewise.
week. Bye-bye.